Researchers found a missing family's remains in a cave after 5 years. But when FBI experts examined the evidence, they discovered something terrifying. The crime scene had been completely faked. But to understand why this discovery was so shocking, we need to go back 5 years to when the nightmare first began. March 22, 2012. The Hutchins family was supposed to be enjoying a simple spring break vacation at the Grand Canyon. Lisa Hutchins, a dedicated nurse at Phoenix General Hospital, had been planning this trip for months as a way to bond with her 3 children. 14-year-old Tyler was her oldest, a quiet kid who loved photography and had been excited about capturing the canyon's beauty. 8-year-old Connor was the middle child, full of energy and constantly asking questions about everything around him. And 6-year-old Mia was the baby of the family, a sweet little girl who still believed in fairy tales and magic. But there was a 4th person on this trip who made everything complicated: Brandon Hutchins, Lisa's husband and the children's stepfather, a man who had spent years destroying lives and making enemies everywhere he went. Brandon wasn't just disliked in their hometown of Flagstaff, Arizona. He was absolutely despised by nearly everyone who knew him. 2 years before the trip, he had cheated his elderly neighbor out of her life savings by convincing her to invest in a fake business scheme. The poor woman lost everything and had to move in with relatives in another state. Brandon had also been caught stealing tools from his construction job sites and selling them online. His co-workers nicknamed him Thief Brandon, and several had filed complaints with management. But the worst part of Brandon's character was how he treated his own family. Neighbors regularly heard him screaming at Lisa and the children through the thin walls of their apartment. Child Protective Services had been called twice after teachers noticed bruises on the kids, but Brandon was smooth with words and always managed to convince the social workers that everything was fine. The people of Flagstaff didn't just avoid Brandon Hutchins, they actively hoped something terrible would happen to him. His own brother had cut all contact after Brandon tried to forge their deceased father's will to steal the inheritance. Lisa's sister had begged her multiple times to leave Brandon, even offering to help pay for a divorce lawyer. The local grocery store had banned him after he was caught switching price tags to get cheaper deals. Even the bartender at his favorite dive bar had started watering down his drinks and overcharging him out of pure spite. Brandon Hutchins was the kind of person who left a trail of broken trust and financial ruin wherever he went. So when the Hutchins family's rental SUV was found abandoned in a Grand Canyon parking lot on March 25, 2012, after they failed to return their vehicle on time, nobody was surprised that suspicion immediately fell on Brandon. The SUV was parked perfectly between the white lines. All doors were unlocked. The keys were sitting on the driver's seat. But here's what made investigators immediately suspicious. There were no signs that the family had ever attempted to hike any of the trails. All of their hiking gear was still neatly packed in the back. Lisa's purse was in the passenger seat with her wallet, credit cards, and $300 in cash, completely untouched. The children's backpacks were there too, filled with snacks, games, and souvenirs they'd bought earlier that day. The initial search operation was massive. Over 400 volunteers joined park rangers, helicopter crews, and search dogs to comb every inch of the surrounding area. For 3 weeks, teams searched canyon trails, rocky outcrops, and dangerous cliff areas where someone might have fallen. They found absolutely nothing. No clothing fragments caught on bushes, no footprints on dusty trails, no emergency signals or calls for help. It was as if the family had simply evaporated into thin air right there in that parking lot. But the more investigators looked into Brandon's background, the more convinced they became that he had planned the whole thing. Brandon owed serious money to dangerous people all over Arizona. He'd borrowed from loan sharks in Phoenix to cover gambling debts that had grown completely out of control. His credit cards were maxed out. The family was 4 months behind on rent and facing eviction. Lisa had been secretly meeting with a divorce attorney and had started hiding money in a separate bank account. Brandon's world was falling apart and everyone believed he'd found a permanent solution. The theory was simple and horrifying. Brandon had murdered his wife and stepchildren somewhere along the drive to the Grand Canyon, hidden their bodies in the vast Arizona desert, then disappeared to start a new life under a fake identity. If you can't stand manipulative predators like Brandon Hutchins who destroy innocent families, hit that subscribe button right now. Only people who support abusers and thieves won't subscribe. The media coverage was absolutely brutal. Brandon's face was plastered across every news channel in America as the primary suspect in what reporters were calling the Grand Canyon family murders. His mugshot from a previous arrest for check fraud became the most recognizable image associated with the case. CNN ran a special investigation titled Living with a Monster, where they interviewed everyone who had ever been hurt by Brandon's schemes. His former co-workers shared stories of how he would steal their lunch money and blame other employees. His elderly victim, Mrs. Patterson, appeared on camera from her tiny one-bedroom apartment, crying as she explained how Brandon had stolen her retirement savings and left her with nothing. The most damaging interview came from Lisa's sister, Jennifer, who revealed chilling details about Brandon's behavior in the months before the trip. She told reporters that Lisa had been planning to file for divorce and take the children away from Brandon. Jennifer had secretly recorded a phone call where Lisa described finding disturbing searches on Brandon's computer about how to dispose of bodies and how long it takes for bones to decompose in desert climates. Lisa had been terrified, but was trying to gather evidence before making her escape. Jennifer's tearful testimony painted a picture of a woman who knew she was in danger, but ran out of time to save herself and her children. Online true crime communities exploded with theories about where Brandon might be hiding. Amateur detectives created detailed timelines showing possible escape routes from the Grand Canyon. Some believed he had fled to Mexico using fake documents. Others thought he was living under a new identity in Canada or Europe. Web's leaders dedicated to tracking Brandon Hutchins popped up everywhere, with users sharing supposed sightings from around the world. A woman in Seattle swore she saw him working at a coffee shop. A tourist claimed to have spotted him on a beach in Thailand. Every few months, a new Brandon sighting would go viral on social media, but none ever led to any real evidence. The FBI investigation revealed just how deep Brandon's criminal behavior went. Agents discovered he had been planning some kind of escape for months before the trip. He had researched how to create false identities online. His computer showed searches for countries without extradition treaties with the United States. Most disturbing of all, investigators found that Brandon had taken out a massive life insurance policy on Lisa and the children just 6 months before they disappeared. The policy was worth over $500,000, but since no bodies were found, the insurance company refused to pay out. Brandon's own family turned against him completely. His mother gave a heartbreaking interview where she apologized to the victims of her son's crimes and begged him to turn himself in. She admitted that she had always known there was something wrong with Brandon, even as a child. He had tortured small animals and showed no empathy when other people were hurt. His brother publicly stated that he hoped Brandon would be caught and executed for what he had done to those innocent children. Even Brandon's former gambling buddies came forward to describe his violent temper when he lost money and how he had threatened to make everyone pay for his problems. By 2015, the case had gone completely cold. The FBI officially suspended active investigation, though they kept the case files open in case new evidence surfaced. Lisa's family held a memorial service for her and the children, even though their bodies had never been recovered. The apartment where the family had lived was cleaned out and rented to new tenants. Tyler's school retired his jersey number from the basketball team. Connor's Little League team dedicated their season to his memory. Mia's kindergarten class planted a small garden in her honor. Meanwhile, Brandon Hutchins had become the most hated man in America, a symbol of pure evil who represented every parent's worst nightmare. The story became a cautionary tale that parents shared with their children about recognizing dangerous people. Domestic violence organizations used Brandon's case to educate women about warning signs of abusive partners. Law enforcement agencies studied the case as an example of how predators can hide in plain sight while planning horrific crimes. Brandon Hutchins wasn't just a murderer in the public mind. He was a monster who had destroyed an entire family to save his own skin. Comment: Justice for Lisa and the kids. If you believe Brandon Hutchins deserves to rot in prison for what he did to that innocent family, only heartless monsters would defend someone like him. That's why Dr. Rebecca Nash's discovery in March 2017 was so earth-shattering. She wasn't even looking for the Hutchins family when she and her research team were exploring unmapped cave systems about 15 miles from where the family's SUV had been found. Dr. Nash was a geologist studying underground water sources when her team discovered a narrow opening that led to a massive chamber deep beneath the desert floor. What they found scattered across that cave floor would change everything the world thought it knew about what happened to Lisa, Tyler, Connor, and Mia Hutchins. Because after 5 years of searching in all the wrong places, the missing family had finally been found. But the condition of their remains would reveal a truth so horrifying that it would make Brandon Hutchins look like a saint compared to what really happened in that cave. Dr. Nash's team had been mapping the cave system for 2 days when they rappelled into the deepest chamber they had found. The cave was about 60 feet underground, completely cut off from sunlight and natural air circulation. It would have been impossible for anyone to accidentally stumble into this location. Someone would have needed ropes, specialized equipment, and extensive cave exploration experience to reach this spot. That's what made the discovery so shocking. Scattered across the rocky cave floor were human bones, pieces of clothing, and personal items that had been sitting in complete darkness for 5 years. The first thing Dr. Nash noticed was a small pink backpack wedged between 2 large rocks. When she carefully opened it, she found a school ID card with Mia Hutchins's smiling 6-year-old face staring back at her. Inside the backpack were crayons, a coloring book, and a stuffed unicorn that Mia's grandmother had given her for Christmas. Dr. Nash immediately called her team over, and within minutes they had found more evidence. Tyler's camera was lying near the cave entrance, its memory card still intact. Connor's baseball glove was half buried under loose stones, along with his collection of small rocks that he had been gathering during their trip. But it was what they found next that made Dr. Nash's hands shake as she reached for her emergency phone to call the authorities. Partially buried under centuries of dust and fallen rock debris were human skeletal remains. The bones were scattered across a wide area of the cave floor, suggesting that the bodies had been there for years and had been disturbed by natural cave processes. Dr. Nash counted 3 separate skull fragments in different areas of the chamber. Based on the size differences, it appeared to be 2 children and 1 adult. The FBI's crime scene team arrived within hours and began the careful process of documenting and recovering every piece of evidence from the cave. The initial examination confirmed what everyone already suspected. Dental records and DNA testing proved that the remains belonged to Lisa, Tyler, and Connor Hutchins. Lisa's jewelry was found near her skeletal remains, including her wedding ring and a necklace that Tyler had given her for Mother's Day. Tyler's bones were identified through dental records from his orthodontist. Connor's remains were found with a small metal toy car in his pocket that his teacher remembered him bringing to school for show and tell. After 5 years of searching, 3 members of the Hutchins family had finally been found. But here's where the story took a turn that nobody expected. While the FBI crime scene team found clear evidence of Lisa, Tyler, and Connor in that cave, there was one crucial piece missing. Brandon Hutchins' remains were nowhere to be found. The investigators searched every inch of the cave system. They brought in ground-penetrating radar to check for hidden chambers. They even expanded their search to nearby caves and underground areas. Brandon's body simply wasn't there. This discovery immediately reignited all the old theories about Brandon being the killer who had somehow survived and escaped. The missing remains seemed to confirm what everyone had believed from the beginning. Brandon had murdered his family and dumped their bodies in this impossible-to-find cave, then disappeared to start a new life somewhere else. The location made perfect sense for someone trying to hide evidence forever. The cave was so remote and difficult to access that the bodies might never have been found if Dr. Nash's team hadn't been doing their geological research. Brandon had clearly planned this crime carefully, choosing a location where he thought the evidence would stay hidden forever. But the FBI's preliminary examination of the remains revealed something that didn't fit the simple murder theory. The positioning of the bones suggested that all three victims had died in roughly the same area of the cave. There were no signs that the bodies had been dragged or moved after death. This meant that Lisa, Tyler, and Connor had somehow all ended up in this deep underground chamber while they were still alive. How had Brandon managed to get his entire family down into this cave without anyone fighting back or trying to escape? The discovery reignited the national obsession with the case. News crews set up camps near the cave entrance. Social media exploded with renewed hatred for Brandon Hutchins and demands that he be found and brought to justice. The FBI announced they were reopening the case as a triple homicide investigation with Brandon as the primary suspect. America's Most Wanted featured the case again, showing age-progressed photos of what Brandon might look like after 5 years on the run. The reward for information leading to his capture was increased to $200,000. If you think Brandon Hutchins is a coward who needs to be dragged back to face justice for murdering those innocent children, smash that like button. Only people who support child killers wouldn't like this video. Lisa's family felt a mixture of relief and renewed grief. Finally, they could lay their loved ones to rest, but the confirmation that Brandon had murdered them made the pain even worse. Jennifer, Lisa's sister, gave another emotional interview where she begged Brandon to turn himself in and face the consequences of his actions. She described the torture of not knowing what had happened to her sister and the children, and how finding their remains in such a horrible place made her realize just how evil Brandon truly was. The funeral for Lisa, Tyler, and Connor was held on a sunny April morning in Flagstaff. Hundreds of people attended to pay their respects to the innocent victims of Brandon's cruelty. But even as the family was being laid to rest, FBI investigators were making discoveries in that cave that would soon turn everything upside down. The FBI's forensic team spent 3 weeks carefully examining every bone, every piece of fabric, and every personal item found in that cave. What they discovered during their detailed analysis would shock even the most experienced investigators. This wasn't just a case of a man murdering his family and hiding the bodies. The evidence pointed to something far more disturbing and calculated than anyone had imagined. Dr. Michael Chen, the FBI's lead forensic expert, found clear signs of blunt force trauma on all 3 skulls. Lisa's skull showed evidence of multiple impacts from a heavy object, suggesting she had been beaten repeatedly before death. Tyler's skull had a large fracture consistent with being struck with something like a rock or metal tool. Most heartbreaking of all, little Connor's remains showed defensive wounds on his arm bones, meaning the 8-year-old had tried to protect himself during the attack. These weren't quick, merciful deaths. The victims had suffered before they died. But the forensic evidence revealed something even more disturbing. Chemical analysis of the bones showed traces of rope fibers embedded in the wrist and ankle areas of all 3 skeletons. This meant that Lisa, Tyler, and Connor had been tied up before they were killed. The rope had been in contact with their bodies long enough to leave permanent traces on their bones. Dr. Chen estimated that the victims had been restrained for several hours, possibly even days before their deaths. The image of that terrified family, bound and helpless in the darkness of that cave, waiting for Brandon to decide their fate, made even hardened FBI agents feel sick. The positioning of the remains told an even more horrible story. Lisa's bones were found closest to the cave entrance, as if she had been trying to protect her children even while tied up. Tyler's remains were in the middle of the chamber, and Connor's were found in the deepest part of the cave. This suggested that Brandon had killed them one by one, possibly forcing the others to watch. The psychological torture he had inflicted on his family in their final hours was beyond anything the investigators had seen in their careers. DNA evidence found under Lisa's fingernails confirmed that she had fought back against her attacker. The scratches contained skin cells that would be crucial for identifying her killer once Brandon was finally captured. Tyler's camera memory card revealed photos taken during their trip that showed the family appearing happy and normal just hours before they disappeared. The final photo, taken at 3:47 p.m. on March 22nd, showed Mia and Connor smiling near a Grand Canyon overlook. By that evening, they were all dead in that cave. The FBI's investigation into how the family had ended up in such a remote location led to another disturbing discovery. Park rangers found evidence that someone had been camping illegally in the area for several days before the family's disappearance. A makeshift campsite about a mile from the cave showed signs of recent use, including food wrappers, cigarette butts, and tire tracks from a vehicle that had been driven off the main road. The cigarette butts contained DNA that didn't match any of the family members, suggesting that Brandon had been planning this crime and preparing the location in advance. Most chilling of all was what investigators found when they examined the cave more closely. Hidden behind some fallen rocks near where Lisa's remains were discovered, they found scratches carved into the cave wall. At first glance, they looked like natural rock formations or random marks left by animals. But when Dr. Nash brought in specialized lighting equipment, the scratches revealed themselves to be crude letters and words carved into the stone. Someone had spent considerable time and effort scraping messages into that cave wall with a sharp object. The FBI's forensic team photographed every inch of the carved messages and brought in linguistics experts to help decode what appeared to be desperate final communications. The handwriting analysis suggested that the carvings had been made by someone under extreme stress, working in complete darkness with limited tools. The letters were uneven and shaky, as if carved by someone whose hands were trembling with fear or cold. Some of the words were incomplete, as if the person carving them had been interrupted or had run out of time. What made these cave carvings even more significant was their location. They were positioned at exactly the height where someone would be sitting on the cave floor, suggesting that whoever made them had been unable to stand up, possibly due to being restrained. The carvings were also concentrated in the area where Lisa's remains had been found, leading investigators to believe that she had created these final messages during her last hours alive. Comment: Brandon is pure evil. If you believe monsters like him deserve the death penalty for what they do to innocent families. Anyone who defends child murderers has no soul. The FBI kept the details about the cave carvings secret from the media while they worked to fully decode the messages. They knew that once this information became public, it would create a media frenzy that could interfere with their investigation. But they also knew that these final words from Lisa Hutchins would provide crucial evidence about exactly what had happened in that cave, and might even reveal information about where Brandon had gone after committing these horrible crimes. The linguistics team worked around the clock to piece together the fragmented messages carved into the cave wall. What they discovered would not only confirm Brandon's guilt, but reveal details about the murders that would haunt everyone involved in the case for the rest of their lives. The linguistics team spent days carefully documenting and analyzing every scratch mark on that cave wall. What they found carved into the stone would become some of the most haunting evidence ever presented in a criminal case. Using high-powered lights and magnification equipment, they were able to piece together desperate final messages that Lisa Hutchins had scraped into the rock during her last hours alive. The words were shaky and incomplete, carved by someone working in total darkness with what appeared to be a small piece of metal, possibly from her jewelry. The first message they decoded was heartbreaking in its simplicity. "Tell my mom I love her," was carved near where Lisa's remains had been found. Below that, in even shakier letters, was "Tyler, be brave for mommy." The forensic team could barely continue their work when they found the next message carved deeper into the stone. "Connor, don't cry, baby, mommy loves you." These weren't just final words. They were a mother's desperate attempt to comfort her children even as they faced death together in that horrible cave. But it was the longest message that provided the most crucial evidence for the FBI's case. Carved in a section of wall that would have required hours of work in complete darkness, Lisa had managed to scratch out a detailed account of what had happened to them. Brandon said family trip but drove wrong way, made us walk in desert, found cave and pushed us inside, tied us up, said nobody would find us here. Tyler tried to run but Brandon hit him with rock. Connor keeps asking for water. Been here 2 days. Brandon comes back with food but only for himself. The message continued with details that made even experienced investigators feel physically sick. Brandon says he needs insurance money and new life. Keeps talking about places he wants to go when we're gone. Told Tyler he was never his real dad anyway. Made Mia watch when he hurt Connor. Said he's been planning this for months. Found rope and tools hidden near cave entrance. This was an accident. He brought us here to die. The final part of Lisa's message revealed the full extent of Brandon's cruelty. Brandon left yesterday morning, said he's going back to make it look like accident at Grand Canyon. Promised to come back, but I know he's lying. Water almost gone. Kids getting weak. If someone finds this, please tell everyone Brandon Hutchins murdered his family on March 24, 2012. Don't let him get away with this. He's evil. The date. March 24th was crucial evidence because it proved that the family had been held captive in that cave for at least 2 full days before they died. Brandon had taken his time torturing them, possibly enjoying their suffering before finally deciding to finish what he had started. The fact that he had left them without water while he went back to stage the scene at the Grand Canyon showed a level of calculated cruelty that shocked even the FBI agents who had worked hundreds of murder cases. DNA analysis of the metal fragment found near the carvings confirmed that Lisa had used a small piece of her broken watch to scratch the messages into the stone. The watch had been a gift from her children for her birthday, and she had used it to create evidence that would hopefully bring their killer to justice. The forensic team estimated that carving all those messages would have taken Lisa at least 8 to 10 hours of continuous work in complete darkness while tied up and slowly dying of dehydration. The revelation about the cave messages sent shockwaves through the media and law enforcement community. This wasn't just a murder case anymore. It was proof of prolonged torture and psychological abuse that Brandon had inflicted on his innocent family. The FBI immediately upgraded their manhunt to the highest priority level. Brandon Hutchins was now wanted for aggravated murder, kidnapping, torture, and child abuse resulting in death. The reward for his capture was increased to $500,000. News of Lisa's final messages sparked outrage across the country. Vigils were held in dozens of cities for the family who had suffered such a horrible death. Online groups dedicated to tracking Brandon grew to hundreds of thousands of members sharing tips and possible sightings. The hashtag Justice for Lisa became one of the most shared topics on social media. Even hardened criminals in prison were reportedly disgusted by Brandon's actions, with several inmates stating that child killers like him wouldn't last long if he was ever caught and sent to prison. The FBI used the new evidence to create a detailed timeline of the crime. Brandon had clearly been planning the murders for weeks or possibly months before the trip. He had scouted the remote cave location and hidden supplies there in advance. On March 22nd, instead of going to the Grand Canyon, he had driven his family into the desert and forced them to hike to the cave at gunpoint. He had kept them alive for at least 2 days, possibly enjoying their terror and pain. On March 24th, he had murdered all 3 of them, then returned to the Grand Canyon to abandon their vehicle and create the illusion that they had disappeared while hiking. The evidence painted Brandon as something far worse than just a desperate man trying to escape his debts. He was a sadistic killer who had enjoyed torturing his own family before murdering them. The weeks of planning, the remote location, and the extended torture all pointed to someone who took pleasure in causing suffering. Brandon Hutchins wasn't just a murderer. He was a monster who had destroyed 3 innocent lives to satisfy his own twisted desires. If you think Brandon Hutchins deserves to burn in hell for what he did to those helpless children, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Only sick individuals would have any sympathy for a child-torturing monster like him. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit created a new profile of Brandon based on this evidence. They believed he was living somewhere under a false identity, possibly remarried to another unsuspecting woman with children. The psychological profile suggested that Brandon would eventually kill again because he had clearly enjoyed the power and control he felt while murdering his family. The race was on to find him before he could destroy another innocent family. But what the FBI discovered next would change everything they thought they knew about this case. The FBI's investigation took a shocking turn when Dr. Chen ran advanced carbon dating tests on the metal fragments found near Lisa's carved messages. What he discovered would completely destroy everything investigators thought they knew about this case. The metal fragments weren't 5 years old. According to the laboratory results, The scratches in that cave wall had been made within the last 6 months, not in 2012 when the family disappeared. Someone had been inside that cave recently, carving those messages long after Lisa, Tyler, and Connor were already dead. This revelation sent the entire investigation into chaos. If Lisa hadn't carved those messages during her final hours, then who had? And why would someone go to such extreme lengths to create fake evidence? The FBI immediately sealed off the cave and brought in a new team of forensic experts to re-examine every piece of evidence they had collected. What they found was even more disturbing than the original discovery. Advanced forensic analysis revealed that someone had carefully staged the entire crime scene. The personal belongings scattered around the cave had been placed there deliberately to tell a specific story. Mia's backpack had been positioned exactly where investigators would find it first. Tyler's camera had been wiped clean of fingerprints except for old ones belonging to Tyler himself. Even the rope fibers found on the bones had been added recently, not during the original murders. Someone with extensive knowledge of forensic science had spent considerable time and effort creating a false narrative about how the family had died. The most chilling discovery came when investigators used specialized equipment to examine the cave walls more carefully. Hidden beneath the fake messages they had found, there were older, fainter scratches that had been deliberately covered up or altered. These original carvings told a completely different story than the ones that had initially been discovered. The real final messages were shorter and more fragmented, but they contained one crucial piece of information that changed everything. The original scratches didn't say Brandon had killed them. They mentioned someone else entirely. FBI investigators were still trying to process this new evidence when they received a phone call that would shock the entire country. On November 15, 2017, exactly 8 months after the cave discovery, Brandon Hutchins walked into a police station in Las Vegas, Nevada, and turned himself in. After 5 years on the run, the most hated man in America had suddenly decided to surrender, but his story about what had really happened to his family would be even more unbelievable than the evidence they had found in that cave. Brandon looked completely different after 5 years of hiding. His hair was gray, he had lost significant weight, and his face showed the stress of living as a fugitive. But his first words to investigators were not what anyone expected to hear. "I didn't kill my family," he said. "I've been running because I knew whoever really killed them would come after me next. But when I saw the news about those fake messages in the cave, I realized the real killer is still out there, and he's trying to frame me for crimes I didn't commit." Brandon's story was almost impossible to believe, but he provided details that only the real killer could have known. He explained that on March 22, 2012, his family had been approached by someone at the Grand Canyon who claimed to be a park ranger. This person had told them about a special cave tour that wasn't available to regular tourists. Brandon admitted that he should have been suspicious, but the man had official-looking credentials and seemed to know details about the family that made them trust him. According to Brandon, he had been separated from Lisa and the children during the cave tour when the fake ranger led them down a different path. When Brandon realized something was wrong and tried to find them, he discovered their bodies in that cave, already dead. But before he could call for help, he heard vehicles approaching and panicked. Brandon claimed that he knew his criminal history would make him the primary suspect, so he had run instead of reporting the murders. He had been living under false identities ever since, too scared to come forward because he knew no one would believe his story. The FBI was skeptical of Brandon's claims until he provided them with information that had never been made public. He knew details about the cave layout that weren't in any police reports. He described personal items belonging to his family that had been found but never mentioned in the media. Most importantly, he provided the name of the person he believed was the real killer, a man who had been following their family for weeks before the murders and who had access to official Park Service credentials. But before Brandon could provide more details or evidence to support his incredible story, something happened that would leave this case forever unsolved. On November 18th, just 3 days after surrendering to police, Brandon Hutchins disappeared from FBI custody. Security cameras showed him being escorted to an interview room, but he was never seen leaving the building. An extensive search found no trace of how he had vanished from a secured federal facility. The only thing left behind was a handwritten note found in the interview room where Brandon had last been seen. The message was written in Brandon's handwriting and contained just 7 words that would haunt investigators for years to come. He's still watching us all. Trust nobody. Below that, in smaller letters, was one final warning that made everyone involved in the case fear for their safety. The cave was just the beginning. If you believe there are monsters out there who manipulate evidence and destroy families just for the thrill of it, subscribe and turn on notifications to stay safe. Only people who support killers and psychopaths won't subscribe to protect themselves and their loved ones. To this day, Brandon Hutchins has never been found. The real identity of Lisa, Tyler, and Connor's killer remains unknown. And somewhere out there, someone is still watching, still waiting, and still planning their next move. The Hutchins family case officially remains unsolved, but one thing is certain. Evil doesn't always look like what we expect, and sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones we never see coming.